Okay, we're going to go ahead and start because I have to teach a broker CE class this afternoon for 4 hours. So we'll get through this one. Couple things. I was asked to go back and go through the forms slower. I just highlighted the changes. So we're going to break this into several sessions. Also, my Mondays are tied up right now with Betty's doctor's appointments down here. So we're going to combine everything into Wednesday sessions for right now till I get all that straightened out. So before we get into the form changes, there's a couple things that have come up that I want to cover, and then I'll have us go into the forms. And today I want to concentrate on the forms. If you want to locate them, they were sent to you there. The appraisal contingency notice and the conventional VA FHA appraisal financial addendums for the appraisal. We're going to take a hard look at those this morning, and then we'll go from there. Now, I have muted everyone. If you want to ask me a question or talk to me, unmute your microphone, and you will be able to ask me questions or comment. The first thing I want to talk about, though, advertising by licensees. Okay. The broker is responsible, and this is directly from the law. This is not ethics or anything like that. This is the actual law in Virginia. All advertising must be under the direct supervision of the principal broker or supervising broker and the name of the firm, and when applicable, comply with disclosure required by 54.1, 2138.1, which is limited service agency agreements. But this is the key to it. The firm's license name must be clear and legibly displayed on all advertising. If you have a team or you're advertising in a name other than your own, it makes no difference. The broker, Fairfax Realty of Tyson's or Fairfax Realty Select, must be in all your advertising. It cannot just be the team's name. If so, it's a violation of state law and a violation of the code of ethics, and the broker is responsible for that. So take a hard look at your advertising and make sure that you are clearly making sure everybody knows that you are with one of the offices of Fairfax Realty. I want to share a few definitions with you directly from the statute. You can always go, if you want to read this stuff yourself, you can go to 18 VAC 135-20-190. That's where you would find it in our law. So that's 18 Virginia Code VAC 135-20-190, and it's called advertising by licensees. Okay, so the definitions are as follows. Advertising means all forms of representation, promotion, and solicitation disseminated in any manner. So if you have anything on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, anything about real estate, okay, it must have the firm's name in that advertising. You can have your name, you can have your team name, but it must contain your office name also. Contact information means telephone number or web address. Okay. Disclosure in the context of electronic media advertising. Any advertising by the firm has to contain the firm's license name and the city and state in which the firm's main office or branch office is located. So that's for the brokers here. Okay. Now, for you, the agents, advertising by affiliated licensees that contains the licensee's name, the name of the firm with which the licensee is active, and the city and state in which the licensee's place of business is located. So you have to have your name, okay? You have to have your office name and where the office is or the main office, okay? And the disclosure shall be viewable on the main page, or no more than one click away. So if they enter your website, or they look at Twitter, or they looked at Facebook, you need to have Fairfax Realty, whatever office name you are in that Facebook post, okay? And there can be just the web address. It does not have to be the phone number. Now, when it comes to the signs in the yard, any sign in the yard must have the office name and phone number. Okay, it has to have it. That's by state law. You can have your name and on sign and etc., but it must have that phone number and name of the office. Okay, that is not code of ethics. Now, Article 12 of the Code of Ethics states the same thing. Okay, so code of ethics, you'll be fined. Okay, DPOR could do anything they want. You don't want to be messing around with DPOR. So make sure we get that correct. One other thing that has happened, not our firm, but has happened. They have changed the code of ethics. And in light of what's been happening here recently, I want to make sure everybody understands the change to Article 10-5 of our code of ethics. You don't have that. I'm just throwing this out here for you today. Okay. They made a change to the Code of Ethics arbitration manual, and it says the Code of Ethics. This revised policy expands applicability to all of your activities, not just when you're dealing with clients and customers in real estate. It covers everything. Okay, so Article 10-5 now reads: must not use harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. If you are out there posting anything, and it can be construed to discriminate against one of those parties, those groups that are protected under Article 10, it's not just in real estate now, okay? And I'm seeing some really strange stuff out there, and some real estate agents have already gotten in trouble for some of the posts they're putting out there about what's happening in the political climate, because it goes on to define it as inciting a riot. Okay, so be careful with what you post out there, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to beat it to death. I will be covering that today in my broker CE class with brokers. Any questions about those two items before we start looking at these forms? Okay, so please check all your advertising. Make sure it does contain the firm's name. I will be back from Florida in the office. I know this sounds crazy, but I'm coming back in February. I have some stuff I need to take care of and some classes up there to do. So, if you have any questions, stop by the office, visit me, and I'll look at your advertising and make sure that it's right, or just send me a copy of it, and I'll tell you how it looks. Okay. Now, I want to cover, and I promised I would slow down today and not just say it's here, read it. Okay. I want to start with the appraisal contingency notice. It was in the package of the paper sent to you. I don't know. It's probably the last one in the package. Appraisal contingency notice. So they made some changes to our financing and appraisal addendum forms, and now it requires an appraisal contingency notice to be sent in relation to removing the appraisal contingency. So let's just take a look at this form, and then I want to take a look at the different forms of appraisal contingencies, because VA, FHA, conventional, they're all different in how they're handled. Okay, which is why you can't just go ahead and change from conventional to FHA without the seller's permission, even though the lender said we need to do this, okay? So appraisal contingency notice. This notice is given. Remember, a notice is a unilateral communication. So we're not sending an addendum, we're sending this notice. And a notice only has to be signed by the buyer, okay, for the appraisal contingency. In accordance with the contract, you can read that part. The contract referenced above is contingent on an appraisal pursuant to the conventional financing and appraisal contingency, or FHA, VA, etc. Or no financing contingency. Buyer hereby provides notice to the seller as follows, and you can only choose one option. If you check more than one box, this form, you'll notice at the bottom, has no force and effect. So, and this reflects the language from each of our addendum forms, okay? The appraisal is equal to or greater than the sales price. Contingency is satisfied and removed, and they'll proceed to settlement. So once the appraisal comes in, it says it's fine, okay? Then you would check box 1, send a notice over, and that contingency is removed. Or the second option, your buyer can elect to proceed with consummation of this contract without regard to the appraisal. The appraisal contingency is removed. The party shall proceed to settlement at the sales price. So if you had a contract not contingent on appraisal, but the lender still does an appraisal, when it comes in, okay, you would check this box and send it over, even if it appraises for less. Now, your third choice, the appraisal is equal to or greater than the sales price. However, buyer elects not to proceed with the consummation of this contract because the property either 1, does not satisfy lender's requirements, 2, appraisal does not allow for the specified financing, and or 3, property is inadequate collateral. So here's the situation. It doesn't matter if the appraiser appraises the property at the sales price. Who has the final say as to whether or not the property appraised? Okay. It's the underwriter, okay? Each financing institution has a reviewer of the appraisal. And if they don't like the appraisal, they can lower the amount, or they can say, it doesn't meet our requirements, or it's not adequate collateral, okay? So we had a situation where an agent has a buyer taking out a conventional loan to buy a property that they were going to tear down and rebuild a new property on the property. Well, that's going to be inadequate collateral. What lender is going to lend on a house that's no longer going to be there? Okay, so the lender has the final say. Now, if this is the case, see attached written statement and written denial of the financing showing evidence of the lender's decision concerning the property. So buyer declares the contract void. You can't just say, use this as an automatic get out of jail free card. You actually have to attach the denial from the lender. Okay. Any questions about that one?
Larry, I have a question.
Okay.
This notice should be sent as part of the initial offer or after an offer is accepted?
No, you don't send us appraisal contingency notice until you receive the appraisal.
Okay.
Okay. This is separate. This is separate altogether. But when we look at the addendum forms for conventional financing and appraisal, this language is in that paragraph. Okay, so this form mirrors that language. It's just now you have to choose which one is applicable. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Now this is where it gets interesting. You had it was contingent on an appraisal. The appraisal is less than the sales price, and buyer elects to negotiate a mutually acceptable new sales price. Buyer's proposed sales price is X amount of dollars. Okay, now it cannot be less than the appraised value. Okay, it can be higher. So if the appraised value, the contract was for 200, okay, the appraisal came in at 180, the buyer can negotiate 190 and bring the additional 10,000 to the table. Okay. So, but it's a negotiable item, and we'll see the negotiation, how it works when we take a look at each one of the addendums. Okay, so please see attached written statements setting forth the appraised value of the property. Now, this is why they had to reissue the appraisal contingency notice. Under conventional, if the party's willing to lower the price down to the sales price, then you still have a contract. But under FHA, VA, and USDA, if the appraisal comes in less, even if the seller is willing to lower the price, the buyer can walk. Okay, the buyer doesn't have to take the property. It's an automatic out if it doesn't appraise. Okay, so the appraisal is less than the sales price and buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract. Please see attached written addendum or statement. The buyer declares the contract void. So you don't have to send a notice to void over for FHA, VA, USDA. If you check this box and you send this form over, that is the notice to void the contract. You understand? Any other time that you're going to void a contract, you need to send the notice to void and the release. So this is a notice to void if you check that last box under FHA, VA, or USDA. Okay. All right, then let's take a look at the conventional financing and appraisal contingency addendum that you have in your package. We're not going to look at the whole thing. We're dealing with the appraisal contingency today. I mean, if you have a question about the other part of it, I'll be glad to answer. But if you go to the second page, appraisal contingency, and this first paragraph is where you're going to see most of the biggest changes between conventional, VA, and FHA. This contract is contingent or is not contingent upon an appraisal pursuant to this paragraph. Okay. Buyer shall have until 9 p.m., minimum of 21 days. Has anyone had any trouble with getting the appraisals within the 21 days? You know, I know for a while there was some problem getting appraisals because of the COVID. You know, appraisers didn't want to go in properties, or sellers didn't want appraisers in properties, etc. But make sure you give yourself enough time. I usually use 30 days if I can get it as the buyer's agent, just because of the TRID rules, Truth in Lending RESPA Integrated Disclosure Act. Okay. Following the data ratification to obtain an appraisal, and remember, data ratification is a capitalized word, so that is defined in paragraph 31A of our sales contract, and that says when it is delivered. Okay, not when you get the last signature, but when it's delivered, that's when you start counting these days. If neither box is checked, this contract is contingent upon an appraisal pursuant to this paragraph, and the appraisal deadline is the financing deadline set forth above. Make sure you check the box that it is contingent and the number of days, because a lot of times the appraisal would be a lot different than the financing deadline. You can't even get a check to order the appraisal until the intent to proceed with the loan has taken place. That might be just about the same time you get your loan approval. So give yourself time. Don't let that be the default. That's my recommendation. Okay. Buyer shall deliver notice to seller by the appraisal deadline as follows. And that's that appraisal contingency removal. Okay. So that appraisal contingency notice, this contract calls for it. So it has to take place. Okay. And these match up. A, appraisal is equal to or greater, buyer elects to proceed, and B, C, the lender doesn't approve the property. I want to concentrate on D, okay? The appraisal is less than the sales price, and the buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract unless seller elects to lower the sales price. Buyer's appraisal contingency notice shall include a copy of the written statement and the buyer's proposed sales price, which shall not be lower than the appraised value. Okay. Now, we are going to enter into a negotiation period, right? In the event of this subparagraph 5D, the party shall have until 9 p.m. X number of days for a negotiating period. 3 or 5 days, you probably should be able to arrive at this, right? After the buyer's delivery, and there's that capital D in delivery, that means it goes to wherever it is in paragraph 6, of appraisal contingency notice to negotiate a mutually acceptable new sales price. And this is just like, this negotiating period is just like for home inspection, well, any of those, okay? Right on. At any time during the negotiating period, buyer or seller may make, modify, rescind, or alter as many offers and counter offers as desired to reach mutually acceptable terms. Now, this does not have to be in writing back and forth. Okay, the agents can be relaying messages back and forth. The seller says, no, I'm not going to take this, but I'll take this. The buyer says, no, but I'll give you this. You can do that back and forth all you want. But buyer and seller can only agree to terms by signing a written addendum describing the agreed upon new sales price, okay? Within the negotiating period. So if you put 9 p.m., 3 days at 9 p.m., if you do not have a written addendum, okay, all offers and counter offers terminate. It is off of the table. It is no longer negotiable. You understand that? And at 9 p.m., buyer agents at 9 p.m. on the last day that you had for three days or whatever, your buyer now enters the election period. And this is important that you don't mess this up. If at the end of the negotiating period, 9 p.m., the parties are unable to reach an agreement, buyer shall have the option to void this contract by delivering notice to seller by 9 p.m., 1, 2, 3 days, whatever you put, following the end of the negotiating period. And listen to this. Otherwise, this appraisal contingency shall be removed, and this contract will remain in full force and effect at the original sales price. If your buyer can't get that written negotiated agreement by 9 p.m. on the day of the specified for the negotiating period, then your buyer must either void the contract or they're going to go to settlement and have to bring the cash difference to the settlement table. You understand that? It's imperative that you understand, okay? You don't want to put your buyer in a position of being in a default because they don't have the cash difference to bring to the table. So key here, all offers and counter offers terminate at what time? 9 p.m. on the day specified for the negotiating period. We are now into the election period of the buyer. And that's why they had to add this other language for VA, FHA, conventional, because all the way up to settlement, the buyer could back out if the appraisal comes in low, okay? And we'll see that when we look at that addendum. If buyer has not delivered appraisal contingency notice by the appraisal deadline, This appraisal contingency will continue up to and including settlement date. However, upon expiration of the appraisal deadline, seller may, at seller's option, deliver notice to buyer that the buyer has 3 days to void the contract. If the buyer does not void the contract within 3 days following delivery of the seller's notice, this appraisal contingency is removed and the contract will remain in full force and effect without this appraisal contingency. It's just like financing, right? If your seller's tired of waiting and you've gone past that 21 or 30 days for the appraisal, they can send a notice over. That would require NVAR's notice to void not notice to void a contract, but the notice they have for this 3 days, there is a form for that. And then if during that time period, your buyer should send back, if they don't want to go forward with the contract, they should send back that notice to void form that we have from NVAR. I've discussed that one many times with you, right? Everybody clear with paragraph D?
Larry,
If not, speak up. Yes.
what happens if the seller does not send any notice?
Well, then the contingency ends at the settlement. So if there's no notice sent, then this contingency continues up until your seller calls the bluff and says, okay, you have 3 days to void. So how would that happen? I'm a buyer's agent, okay? We've removed all of our other contingencies except for appraisal. And my buyer's gotten cold feet and they don't want the house, or they've even got a problem with their loan and we're trying to find a way out. Then I might purposely not send the appraisal over as the buyer's agent if my buyer doesn't want me to, okay? Hoping that your seller will say what? Well, we haven't received it, so we're sending this notice over. You have 3 days to give it to us. If your seller does that, then they just allowed the buyer out of the contract with no penalty. Now, why would a seller send a notice over? They might have a better offer, okay? If they have a better offer, then they might want to put the pressure on, see if your buyer is willing to go to settlement if they have not received that appraisal after the appraisal contingency, but before settlement. Now,
I have a question.
at settlement, it goes away. Yes.
I'm sorry. When you're saying, so you're saying that the buyer's agent can deliberately not produce the appraisal so that then their client has an out? Is that what you're saying?
Only if the seller, after the appraisal contingency period, but before settlement, and the seller sends the notice over, they have not received the appraisal, then that gives the buyer 3 days to what?
To,
3
yeah,
days to void the
produce it
contract.
or to say I'm out.
Yes, right.
But but on the buyer agent side, that's like saying to the selling agent, no, we don't have the appraisal, but they do really have the appraisal.
Well,
So-
no, it's not saying we don't have it. It's saying that we're not sending the form over.
Oh.
Okay, so it all goes down.
So
it
in
all
other
goes-
words, the selling
this-
agent knows what the appraisal is.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah. I'm not saying do it. I'm saying when would it happen? And that's come a couple of the scenarios that I can see that the form would be sent by the seller, okay? Or a buyer might be holding it. It's just like not removing the financing contingency, right? Sending over the notice, okay? If the seller gets tired of waiting, there's an avenue for the seller to get out, but then they void the contract or give the buyer the option to void. So any other questions? And I'm not saying do that. I'm just saying that that's a situation where it could happen.
Larry, I have a question.
Okay.
On the paragraph D, you say let's say the appraisal is less than sales price.
Uh-huh,
buyer select not to proceed unless the seller elect to lower the sales price.
correct.
Now, can buyer use that, this appraisal? It says, I don't want the house anymore. And
Not
you-
under, not under conventional,
Okay.
okay?
So if the seller elect to lower the price, the buyer have to move forward.
If they would lower the price to the appraised value, yes,
Okay, all right, thank you, Larry.
okay? Any other questions about the conventional one? Okay, let's take a look at the VA financing addendum. Okay, VA financing addendum form. Everybody find it? And I want to go to paragraph 5, appraisal provisions. So you'll see the first paragraph here is a little different than under conventional. It is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this contract, buyer shall not incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money or otherwise be obligated to complete the purchase of the property if this contract purchase price or cost exceeds reasonable value of the property established by VA. Buyer shall, however, have the privilege and option to proceed with consummation without regard to the amount of reasonable value established. They have the absolute right to void, but they can decide to go forward. Same way with FHA. So upon receipt of written statements setting forth the appraised value of the property, buyer shall deliver notice to seller, paragraph B, okay? And A and B, okay, are, so with A, we saw they had the right to void. B, 1, 2, and 3 are the same, but you have a number 4, okay? The appraisal is less than the sales price and buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract. Buyer may void this contract by delivering to seller appraisal contingency notice, including a written copy, including a copy of the written statement. So on your appraisal contingency notice, you would check the box FHA VA is less than the set price, and the buyer just does not want the property. Okay, does not want the property. That is the big difference between conventional VA and FHA. Now, under the appraisal, paragraph 5, the appraisal is less than the sales price and buyer elects to negotiate a mutually acceptable new sales price. Okay, so we have that negotiating period, right? And the language is the same. So we can enter into that negotiating period voluntarily under VA. But if the buyer doesn't want to negotiate and just wants out of the property, check that box on the appraisal contingency notice and it is over. Even if the seller says, well, I'm willing to lower the price down, doesn't matter. Okay. Any questions about the VA form? Now, remember, if your buyer, your VA purchaser with a VA contract chooses paragraph 5 to negotiate, okay, then you've already checked the box, the appraisal is less than the sales price. You don't also check the box that they are avoiding. You do one or the other. Now, if they choose to negotiate, the key to this, all offers and counter offers terminate at what time? 9 p.m. of the negotiating
9 p.m.
period. Okay, so if your buyer goes into paragraph 5, they would have to send over the notice to void the contract. Okay, So there's two choices under VA. I can negotiate, and if we can't reach an agreement by 9 p.m., then void my contract in whatever number of days is in the election period. Or I can void my contract right up front.
Larry, I have a question.
Okay?
Talking about appraisal, so you mentioned before the appraisal contingency notice is a void contract document. So if we use the appraisal contingency notice to void the contract, we don't need to send any other void document.
No,
Okay.
no. But you would then also attach to it the release of the contract and deposit.
Okay.
Remember, there's two different forms.
Yes.
So our
yes.
contract says you have the right to void. You never use the release of the contract and earnest money deposit form to void. So you have the form that voids, which this form would serve as a void for the appraisal, okay? And the release of the contract and deposit,
Thank you, Larry.
okay? Any questions about the VA? Well, let's look at FHA. The FHA contingency form, okay? Language is a little bit different in paragraph 5, okay? I'm sorry, paragraph 6, appraisal provisions. So now with the appraisal provisions under FHA, we have the amendatory clause. It is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this contract, buyer shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property or to incur any penalty by forfeiture of deposit or otherwise unless buyer has been given in accordance with HUD or VA requirements, a written statement by FHA, department or their endorsement lender, setting forth the appraised value of not less than X number of dollars. So that should be the sales price. I've seen this one get messed up in the past where it's not the sales price. It is for some reason they put the price after the down payment of 3.5% or whatever, and the appraisal actually came in, lower than that, except, and we had all kinds of problems. So it should be the same. Now, buyer shall have the privilege and option to proceed with consummation of this contract without regard to the amount of the appraised value. Okay. And they make sure that everybody understands the appraised value is arrived at to determine the maximum mortgage of the Department of HUD will insure. So who is the appraiser working for? They're working for the lender. They're not working for the buyer. Okay, they're not working for the seller. HUD does not warrant the value of the condition of the property. Buyer should satisfy himself, herself, that the price and condition of the property are acceptable. Now notice, the dollar amount to be inserted in the amendatory clause is the purchase price as stated in this contract. If buyer and seller agree to adjust the price in response to an appraised value that is less than the purchase price, a new amendatory clause is not required. This automatically becomes, you don't have to scratch it out and do whatever. So if the appraisal came back at 180, everybody agreed to 180, that's the new price. You don't have to have addendums and all to change this paragraph. All right. And so the appraisal is the same way. The appraisal procedures are the same way, except for you do have the paragraph 4 that says sales price and buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract. Buyer may void this contract by delivering the seller an appraisal contingency notice. So they do have the right to void, or they can go into that negotiating period. If they go into that negotiating period, then they better remember to do what? They better remember to void their contract if they get into the buyer's election period. So conventional does not have number 4, only VA, FHA, and USDA. Everybody understand the differences and how you remove it properly. Okay. Well, we have a few minutes left. I don't want to start any other forms. We're going to do those next Wednesday at 11. You have any questions?
I
For me,
have one
that-
question to clear.
Okay.
That
Okay.
in the election period, we have 3 days election period. Up
Well,
third day,
it's whatever, it's
up
whatever
to
you
8
put in.
a.m., 8 p.m., there is no conclusion. Then we have to send the notice of release by 9 p.m.
Whatever number of days you put in that negotiating period. So
Mhm.
you could have 7, you could have 9, you could
Yes.
have 3. But
Yeah.
by 9 p.m. on
Okay.
by 9 p.m. on that day, you must have a written addendum changing the sales price. Okay.
Okay.
If you don't have a written addendum delivered, signed by all parties by 9 p.m., you are now in the period where the buyer has to either void or go forward and bring cash difference to the table.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, so make sure that you don't
Hi,
mess
I
up.
have,
Okay. Go ahead, Ashley.
hi Larry, I have a question if you have
Okay.
time, please.
Sure.
Okay, my question actually is on the home inspection
Okay.
addendum.
Okay.
So I have a contract, I have a listing that I got a contract on it. They check number 2, which is home inspection with option to void only.
Yes.
And they put 7 days. So the
Uh-huh.
7 days is going to be Friday. And they already did inspection yesterday.
Uh-huh.
So do they actually have until Friday to give us a notice? And it doesn't
Yes.
look like they actually, are they supposed to give us a notice?
If they don't, then they've waived it and they go forward to settlement without the home inspection.
Right. But
But they
they
have all
do
the way up, they have all the way up until the end of the period.
end of the period that, okay, all right, I understand. Is there, just in case they come back and say that we want to void, is there any, I guess, chance to negotiate?
You could try, but
Right.
no, once a contract is, a notice of to void is delivered, there's no longer a contract.
Right.
So if you renegotiate something, technically you'd have to have a new contract.
Oh, you
'Cause
have to have a
you
new
can't-
contract, not
yeah, you
just
can't-
an
you can't-
addendum.
You can't resurrect something that's dead with an addendum. And once a contract is voided by the buyer, there's no longer a contract.
Oh, I see. Okay, I didn't know that part. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Now, let's go back to this negotiating period on this finance, okay? If you're getting close to 9 p.m. and you guys are still negotiating back and forth, trying to get this thing worked out, then get an addendum to your contract signed, extending the negotiating period. Don't let the negotiating period go past 9 p.m. without a written extension to extend that negotiating period, or you are in that next paragraph. Okay, so you can always extend. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it doesn't happen where people come up with something after the period and we go to the settlement table and everybody's happy without getting things in writing. If that happens, that's fine. But technically, if I got an attorney, anything we agreed to after we don't have a contract probably wouldn't be enforceable. So I like to have everything in writing by, extending, et cetera, if we have to. Any other questions?
Thank you
Okay.
for the session.
Well, you're welcome. So next week, we will go over the new home sales addendum form. options addendum, exclusive right to lease, et cetera. We'll cover the rest of those. But I'm combining the sessions on Wednesdays to be Ask Larry and go over these forms. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Until I get through all these doctor's appointments with Betty.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, thank you,
Hey,
guys.
Can you hear me,
Thank you,
Larry?
Larry.
Yeah, I can hear
Larry?
you. Yes, sir.
Can I have one quick question before you leave?
Okay.
It's about the Virginia disclosure, residential disclosure property.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
If that doesn't come from the seller, say the seller, the buyer signed it first, and it didn't come from the seller, right?
Yeah.
The buyer can unilaterally cancel the contract anytime he wants. Is that correct?
Well, if the seller never made the disclosure, I would think they could, but I would tell them to get legal advice before they did. But the paragraph says if you have not received the one from the seller, and so buyer agents never fill those things out in blank. Okay.
Okay, because say the buyer filled it out and the seller signed it a day later. Is that still?
Well, I would think that a judge might look at and say, was there any damage from that? But technically, the contract says unless it's received, it has to be received from the buyer. So once it's delivered, from the seller, once it's delivered back, then I don't think it's a problem.
Oh,
But
okay.
if it hadn't been delivered back, it might really be a big problem.
Okay, so just as long as it's there, there.
I think at that point, because the only purpose of that form is not to disclose anything, is to say you have the right to go to the site and see it. But our contract says until the buyer receives the form from the seller. Well, I think once it's been delivered back, I think the buyer's now received it. Okay. But at that point, that buyer might still have 3 days to void the contract according to our contract. But that would be pushing it, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Larry. Thanks.
You're welcome. Hey, if there's no other questions, we will call it a day, and thank you for joining me, and I will see you next Wednesday.
Okay,
Larry,
thank you, Larry. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Larry. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Larry. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Larry, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Thanks, Larry.
You're welcome. What's your
Larry?
question? Yeah.
Yes, I actually checked Facebook as a previous section, try to listen to it, but for some reason I couldn't find the recent one. It's like, are you still recording the Zoom meeting?
Yes, but they're on our site. They're not on Facebook.
I
So,
clicked-
so in that flyer that you receive about my classes,
right,
there's a link to go to the site that has all the pre-recorded classes.
right. That for some reason it's not recording recently.
Huh.
Like 2 months ago, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, is there any way that when I'm in the section, I always want to revisit it, your section?
Well, there's another part that you click there that gives you all of them once you're on that site.
Yeah, once I'm
So-
on the site, listen to your section, I want to record it, but it won't let me. It
Well, I
says-
don't know. I don't know if it'll let you record it. I don't know anything about that type of stuff.
Yeah, normally, normally we can record a session. but
Yeah.
for some reason it says that you have to ask the host.
Yeah, the host, I'm not the host. Actually, Fairfax Realty is the host.
I
Okay.
guess it's not recording it anymore.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
all right.
Okay, Larry,
Yes.
I have a question about the land definition, developed or undeveloped. There is a land in a gated community which has no building on it, and the gas and electricity or water, sorry, is available on the corner of the lot. Is it considered developed or undeveloped?
I think it's undeveloped.
Undeveloped. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Then I will see everybody next Wednesday. I'm going to take a break here before I start up again for the board at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Larry.
Thank you for joining me. I'll see you guys next week.
See you then.
See you.
Take care.